Hello and welcome to Freedom Watch, your daily dose of raw liberty online at foxnews.com/Freedom Watch. I'm Judge Andrew Napolitano here, defending freedom, defending your natural rights, and defending your right to have a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution. Isn't it about time for the government to drop its Victorian facade and let folks do to their bodies in private whatever they wish? If we own our bodies, why cannot we put into our bodies what we want to, so long as that private act does not harm anyone else? No one is seriously suggesting that airline pilots or soldiers or surgeons be permitted to work under the influence of marijuana any more than they can work under the influence of alcohol. But there is a time and a place in privacy for recreational drugs. The time has now come for the government to get out of our homes and leave us alone. Governments in America have been spending about $50 billion with a B dollars annually on drug enforcement, and recreational use increases each year. When will we learn that prohibition is a disaster? Joining me now is former two-time governor of the state of New Mexico and current honorary chair of Our America Initiative, Governor Gary Johnson. Governor Gary, welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Judge, thanks for having me on. And, of course, you hit it all on the head. Prohibition didn't work in the 20s. Why do we think that 50 years, going on 50 years now, I think a pretty serious attempt to stop people from smoking pot? It just hasn't worked. 100 million Americans have tried marijuana. We're arresting 1.8 million people a year on drug-related crime. Half of what we spend on law enforcement, half of what we spend on the courts, and half of what we spend on the prisons is drug-related. And to what end?
Well, to the end that Americans can pretend that we are a Victorian society that we are not. To the end that Americans can put on some sort of a facade and pretense. But the real end is what you've talked about. It's incarcerating people that don't belong in jail. It's wasting tax dollars enforcing crimes that are utterly harmless. And to me, as a libertarian, it's destroying the freedom of choice that each of us has as natural human beings, which the government, of course, overlooks almost every day, but especially with the case of privacy and what we want to do in our homes.
Well, again, I think you've hit it totally on the head. Look, would the world be a better place if no one were allowed to drink? Probably so, but it just doesn't work. Prohibition doesn't work. We now have tens of millions of Americans who are convicted felons, but for our drug laws would otherwise be tax-paying, law-abiding citizens.
When you were the governor of New Mexico, you spent less than you took in. The budget was balanced, and the state was fiscally sound. In the state of California, I think they're in worse shape than the country of Greece. I think they're probably about to fall off a cliff financially. God only knows who or what can save them. Question: do you think that federal authorities will look the other way if this proposition on the ballot this November, which bypasses the legislature, as only a few states, notably California, permit, becomes law, and personal use of marijuana, I'm not talking about medicinal use, I'm talking about recreational use, becomes the law? In other words, you can buy and sell marijuana in California, and the government collects a sales tax.
I certainly hope they look the other way. It's my understanding that that's what brought about the end to prohibition of alcohol, was New York stating that they were unwilling to enforce liquor laws any longer. And it's my understanding that that was the first domino that fell with regard to the prohibition of alcohol. I just have this sense that the country will be a much better place overnight when police can actually concentrate on real crime. And as you alluded to at the very start, look, it's never going to be legal to smoke pot and do harm to others. Never going to be legal to smoke pot, get behind the wheel of a car. But smoking pot confines of your own home, doing no harm to anyone, arguably, other than yourself, that should not be criminal.
Big picture. Why do you think it is criminal? I mean, if 1/3 of the country has tried it, if the Justice Department, the present Justice Department of the Obama administration, is willing to look the other way for medicinal marijuana, why is it that we do have this facade? Why is it still illegal? Why do the feds have the power to pull the plug on California and any other state and say no?
What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results? I have no idea on what basis this war on drugs exists and continues to arrest 1.8 million people a year. Judge, I would always say that's the population of New Mexico that we're arresting in this country every single year. And when you consider the impact that has on law enforcement, the courts, and the prisons, it's enormous. Courts, prisons, law enforcement ought to be concentrating on real crime committed against you or I, whether that be property or bodily harm.
We're chatting with Gary Johnson, who is the former two-term governor of the state of New Mexico. I myself am repelled by the thought of any kind of smoke. My father, whom I love dearly, smoked 4 packs a day for 35 years, including at the dinner table during dinner. So my brothers and I and my mother just don't want anything to do with any kind of smoke, and I'd be terrified of it. But why should my aversion to smoke, whether it's tobacco or marijuana, be translated into the force of law to prevent others from doing it? I think, tell me what you think of this, that this legalization of marijuana could be the tip of the legalization of other private behavior that the government in difficult economic times has finally come to realize it is an utter waste of taxpayer dollars to enforce. I also think that this is a form of state nullification, which will sort of intimidate the feds into looking the other way, even if they don't actually change the federal law, when they realize how overwhelmingly popular certain freedoms are, whether the feds like they're being exercised or not. What do you think about that, Governor?
Well, when you have a Gallup poll a couple of months ago that says that 44% of Americans now favor the legalization of marijuana, it is really, really bad law when 56% of the population says to 44% of the population they belong in jail for their activities. When it comes to other crimes like that, I think we can all agree on what is crime, with the exception of our drug laws and bedroom crime. Is this going to? I think it will also cause people to reflect on what this country really is all about, and that is personal freedom, liberty, and the personal responsibility that goes along with that.
The old first-year law school definition of crime, it's actually an ancient definition, is that crime is harm. So if one is doing something in private and no one is being harmed, then there is no crime. Admittedly, that version of crime would, if affected by the courts or accepted by the legislatures, get a lot of legislation off the books. It might even get off the books the monstrosity that the president signed the other day, because if you don't buy health insurance and you don't pay the fine that the government's going to fine you for buying health insurance, they're going to add to your taxes. And if you don't pay that tax, they're going to put you in jail, where it will cost them a lot more money to house and feed and clothe and insure your health than it would if you didn't have health insurance.
And you touched on it at the top. We're a bankrupt nation. We are absolutely bankrupt. Entitlements have to be slashed: Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. When you look at marijuana, the $70 billion a year that we're spending on the courts, law enforcement, and the prisons. Look, we can legalize marijuana, tax it, regulate it, control it. It's estimated that would generate anywhere between $7 and $11 billion, which is just a drop in the bucket to the problems this country faces right now as a result of its bankruptcy.
This is really an only in America story. California's government bailed out by marijuana. Governor Gary Johnson, thanks for joining us on Freedom Watch.
All right, thanks, Judge.